Hey friends, so good to be back with you for another week. I hope you are doing well. I have a few quick announcements to let you know about just before we get into our service today. On the 29th, we have Life Sunday. It's going to be such a great Sunday. If you have a child that you want to get dedicated, or if you want to get baptized, let us know. Or if you want to become a member, that's also an option. Life Sunday is such a great family celebration, so we're so excited to have that. And then also on the 29th, we have our AGM. So if you call yourself a member here at Burnett Church, join us. It's going to be right after the service at 1 p.m. Lunch is going to be provided, and we are going to go through our annual general meeting. And so we'd hope that you'd come, be with us, join us, and then vote on the things that we have coming down the pipeline. So that's all for the members of the church. And then finally, February 3rd, we have a sisterhood event. It's going to be so much fun. Pastor Melissa has something amazing planned for you ladies. All the registration is going to be on our website, burnettchurch.com. But let's get ready for service today as Pastor Tim brings us the second installment of our series, We Are.
Fortunately, I have a plan. Grab the other end of that. Okay? Now, if I told you that we were going to play tug of war, okay? What would you do? Show me. Right? Lean back. Yep. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Good. You can be dismissed. Thank you very much. He was right on cue. I didn't even have to plan that with him. He just did what I wanted him to do. And I intentionally chose somebody that I was pretty sure couldn't pull me over. And that if push came to shove and you really wanted to play, I would win. So thanks for being a good sport, Malachi. I did ask him ahead of time, by the way, just in case anybody wonders. I did that to illustrate something that's important. Important to the conversation that we're going to have this morning, because sometimes there are things that are happening, things you want to get across, that are going to require you to lean into them a little bit. And I heard this from a wise old pastor once. The things that you want your church to become are going to require you to lean in a particular direction. See, sometimes it's really, really difficult, or at least I find it difficult, to articulate what separates one church from another church. Like, what makes your church different or unique? Because on paper, we're all doing the same things, aren't we? Like, we come in, and we sing songs, and we pray, and some guy gets up and prattles on for a half hour, and we let him do it, and then we go, thank you, Lord, and we go home. Right? On paper, churches are very, very similar, especially within wide scopes of tradition. Like, most Catholic churches are similar, and most churches that would consider themselves evangelical or non-denominational, they're similar. So I find it difficult at times to tell people what makes one church different from another. I ask our board this question all the time. What is it that we're doing that's unique? Give me a compelling reason why we're not running down the road and joining another church from the same fellowship as us that on paper looks very, very similar, has the same doctrinal statements we have, does the same kinds of things we do, even plays a similar kind of music that we have. And the answer that we're trying to give in this series is, I guess, the sum of our leanings, the things that we choose to lean in a direction. So last week, I think churches have a choice to lean towards maintaining tradition or being innovative. Today we're going to talk about, I think you have a choice to lean inward or lean outward. Because I think one of the things that makes our church unique is the heart that we have for people that aren't here, and the leaning that we have in the way that we do ministry towards people that aren't here. We are always, always, always going to open our doors and lean towards people that haven't yet found a church home. And I have a particular, I guess, core value, personal core value, that I carry with me that informs this from my perspective anyhow. And it's this, that the church should never be a place that is committing the sin of plagiarism. I use sin in quotations here. And what I mean by that is that so often we say we serve the God of the universe, who created everything and who in his very nature is creative. and then we copy what somebody else is doing. We don't have the confidence in the creativity of the Creator to ask him to be creative through us. That was a lot of uses of the word creative, I apologize. But I hope you understand what I mean. That I think that God, in his nature, is so multifaceted that no one of our churches can possibly accurately express everything about God. Because what we're trying to do here, right, is be the body of Christ. What we're trying to do here is be a representation of who Jesus was and is and will be into the future. But none of us, none of our churches, none of us individually certainly, have the capacity to accurately show the world everything it needs to know about Jesus. And so I am for all of the churches that aren't like us. And I'm for us being something unique. Last week, Pastor Jordan talked about our leaning towards innovation. This week, I want to talk about our leaning towards hospitality. And I want to do that by teaching you something that, ironically, I inherited from somebody else. So you could call this plagiarism, except it's not. Okay? You'll have to trust me on this. The idea is somebody else's. But it's something that as I spent time learning from other people and trying to listen for the things that resonate in my heart that I might be able to share with somebody else, has become a really core piece of my theology. And it's called party theology. And this isn't a doctrine that you will find written in a textbook anywhere. But I hope that it's helpful to you this morning. And the easiest place to go to learn about it is Luke chapter 14. So if you have a digital Bible, if you have an analog Bible, open it now. If you don't have one, we put the words on the screen. I'm just remembering right now that I didn't say anything about giving or the offering before I started. So look, we're deeply grateful for all the people who connect with us and help us to do ministry week after week. We don't pass plates here anymore. COVID sort of destroyed that for us. So we do most of our giving online digitally, except there is a little wooden box at the back if you want to make an analog contribution. Out in the foyer, there's a banner that you can use the QR code and find an app that we use for all of our giving. So thank you to everybody who does that. Thank you to anybody who wants to do that. Now we'll move on with the rest of the morning. There's always business to take care of, isn't there? Here's the start of party theology. Jesus is at a Pharisee's house in Luke chapter 14. And at verse 7 it says this: when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited you both will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. Our culture is one where we're being taught constantly that he who has the most followers wins, right? I watched a really terrible video a while ago of a young man who was talking about his family and had said to the interviewer, my family is irrelevant. And you know what his reason for his family being irrelevant was? None of them had social media followings worth caring about. His definition of relevance in his life was he who has the most followers wins. And it doesn't matter whether I have been connected to this person my entire life or not. For him, the sum total of his value system had been reduced to how many followers do I have or does another person have on social media. Now look, I think there's lots of great things about social media. I love connecting with friends that I wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with. I long for the days when social media was as simple as reminding my friends what I was going to do that morning, like going for a walk. You remember when Facebook was just people telling other people what you were going to do during your day? And it wasn't like making room and competing and all of that kind of stuff, but it was just this genuine I have a bunch of people that I connect with on here that I haven't connected with in a really long time that live on the other side of the country, and I get to share a part of my day with them. So there are good parts about social media. I don't want it to seem like what I'm saying is social media is all bad all the time. I don't believe that. But I do think that it's reinforcing something that Jesus, wouldn't encourage in our life. Because I don't think that Jesus' encouragement, here if we read verses 7 through 10, is to go and join somebody else's circle, or go make sure you can get into the circle of the most important people. I think what Jesus is saying is go create the circle. And the way to create the circle is to serve. Let me give you an example. When Melissa and I and Layla moved to Toronto to start a church from scratch, we, at one point, went to a church that was just our family. That's it. It was the three of us. And one of us was 2 years old. It was fantastic. I mean, we agreed on just about everything. Well, that's not true. Anyway, we were trying to start a church from scratch in the middle of downtown Toronto. And in my experience, one of the ways that people do that is they go and they try to befriend all the other pastors of all the other churches. And they ask those churches to be kind to them and to give them some of the people that they don't want, and so they can start another church. And we shuffle people from one church to another church, which isn't really growing the church. It's just kind of moving people from one space to another, which sometimes is necessary, but in the case of church planting, we thought that there was another way to do it. We had been exposed to a way of thinking that a church could actually grow up out of the culture. That you didn't need to rely solely on people from the church. And so our hope was that when we started our church, we'd be about 50-50. 50% of these people would be people who had been on a spiritual journey and had made a commitment to Jesus and had decided that's how they wanted to live their life. And the other 50% of those people would be, curious, because I suppose you'd have to be involved and engaged with the church, but hadn't made up their mind yet. Because we felt like that could create a space where other people, along the long course of time, again, you think about a leaning, would be a place that knew how to welcome people who didn't agree with us, who weren't like us. And so instead of going to all the other churches, I did this really awkward thing. I walked around to businesses in our neighborhood, and I said, hey, I want to start a not-for-profit arts collective for social good. Do you know anybody who might be interested in that? Because what I was trying to do was find a common ground with the people around me. And I was trying to use the things that I was passionate about. If you don't know this, I'm a musician, or I used to be. I don't play well enough or long enough anymore to be good at it. But I used to be a musician, and I really like music, and I really like art. And so I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use the things that I'm passionate about and the things that I enjoy to create a circle to invite other people into. And it was extraordinary what happened just as we went around our neighborhood and talked to businesses and tried to recruit. All of a sudden, we had this group of 10 ragtag people who didn't know each other and were just interested in throwing a party for our neighborhood. And what was extraordinary about it was if you've ever tried to go to an independent music venue for a gig, you're pretty happy if 10 people show up. You know, like trying to promote your own show is a difficult thing, especially in a place like Toronto. There's 100 shows every night in different venues. And somehow, by bringing these people together, we started throwing these parties where 150, 200 people would show up. And it gave us the ability to build relationships with people who didn't know Jesus. And it was extraordinary because in the simple, mantra of going out to seek, to serve, and to share our life with those people, what we found was that people started asking us questions rather than us having to initiate all the conversations. I remember we went to one of the artists. Melissa started getting her hair done. Her name was Mary. Mary worked at a salon, and so Melissa started going to Mary because we had been building a relationship. And on Mary's birthday, we showed up at the salon, parked totally illegally in a terrible spot in downtown Toronto. We were one of those people, that nobody wants to be behind when you show up downtown. We created a huge traffic snafu, jumped out of the car, put the four-ways on, knocked on the salon door, had Mary come out, and gave her a really simple gift. I don't even remember what it was. It might have been flowers or something really, really straightforward and simple. And Mary said these words to us in that moment that I'll just never forget, because I want to hear them more and more and more in my life. She said, guys, I don't know what it is, but there's something different about you. Keep in mind, at this point, Mary had no idea that we had aspirations to start a church. She didn't know we were Christians. We had known her for maybe a couple of months. It just hadn't come up yet. But God was speaking to Mary in the midst of our simple conversations, through a simple act of saying, hey, we want to create a circle through servanthood, not just become part of somebody else's circle. And this is exactly what Jesus is doing here, right? Jesus has gone to a Pharisee's house. And what's funny is Jesus has gone to a religious guy's house. But Jesus wasn't really all that interested in the religious guys. Because they're the ones he starts telling all the stories to, going, you guys have it wrong. It was all the other guests. Jesus is saying, don't go join somebody else's circle. Be a servant, create a circle. But Jesus pushes, as he tends to do, a little bit further. Not just with those you like, he continues in verse 12. Because Jesus said to his hosts, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back. And so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they can't repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. What's Jesus saying here? He's saying, make sure your circle is open further than you're going to be comfortable with. Because cancel culture isn't Jesus culture. Simply choosing not to engage with somebody because they disagree with you is not a kingdom value. Mary had a boyfriend. His name was Dave. Maybe I've mentioned Dave before because Dave was a part of a few guys who, when we started doing these things, were the skeptics. You know, like they heard through the grapevine that these guys are Christians. And so this is probably not something we want to be a part of because they, at the time, would have called themselves atheists. I told a story a little while ago about one of Dave's buddies who showed up at one of the gigs and said, I'd like to sing this particular song. I said, what is it? It was called the 10 Crack Commandments by Notorious B.I.G. I'm guessing most of you have never heard it. If you insist, just Google the lyrics and then move on. Or you can take my word for it and say it's probably not the kind of thing you want to Google at all. And don't Google it, because you won't be edified by learning what's in the words. I knew in that moment what Dave and Luther were trying to do. They were trying to push back. They were trying to see the limits to which we would go to accept them. Like, was this really something you wanted to do with us? Or are we going to have to be like you in order to be a part of what you're doing? We let Luther, I think I said something to Luther like, if that's the brand you want to put out into the universe, you go ahead and do the song. And we let him do it, and he did it. But there was a crack in the armor after that. And all of a sudden, the guy who didn't want anything to do with me, him and his friend Dave, started inviting me places. When they would do gigs around town, they would invite me. When they would throw a party for somebody's birthday in the band, they would invite me. And you know what was funny? After a while, the story about this started to circulate throughout the Baptist powers that be that we were connected to at the time. And they ended up sending me a letter that was basically a cease and desist order. You shouldn't be doing this. And you know all I could think of at the time? Mark chapter 2. You know what's in Mark chapter 2? In Mark chapter 2, Jesus is hanging out with a bunch of people that he's not supposed to be hanging out with. And he says to them, it's not the well who need a physician. It's the sick. And if our need to appear to be righteous gets in the way of our ability to connect with absolutely normal people, I think we're missing the boat. You can think of it this way. Don't become so heavenly that you're no earthly good. It's important to know and to be able to relate to regular people. Church people have a hard time with this, at least by reputation. I'm not sure if it's actually something we struggle with or just something that the culture believes about us, but they believe that we're weird and that they wouldn't have anything in common with us. The funny thing is, I think that if we try to find the places of resonance. We do find that we have things to build relationship on. But just like Jesus, we're going to have to show up in some places and hang out with some people that might not meet the approval of those who feel like their righteousness is the most important piece of the puzzle. It's Jesus' righteousness on display, not yours, not mine. Verse 16, Jesus picks up. A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." But they all alike began to make excuses. And the first said, "I have just bought a field, and I must go see it. Please excuse me." Another said, "I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me." Still another, "I just got married, so I can't come." Pause. Folks, remember, the person you marry is the most important and influential person in your life. Make sure you marry somebody whose sense of mission and importance is the same as yours. Because has anybody ever gotten this? "Hey dude, do you want to come hang out?" My wife says I can't. Never happens, right? Never happens. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen sometimes, because sometimes our priorities are out of whack, and we need them to remind us. But if we're constantly fighting each other on the things that are important and the places that we should go, there's a problem. That's bonus material for all of you who aren't married yet. Pastor Tim's marriage advice for the morning. The servant came back and reported to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame." The third part of party theology is stop saying no for other people. My mom had this saying when I was a kid. She liked to keep me on my toes, because I always thought I had my mom figured out. And so every once in a while, I would ask her for something that I was sure she would say no to. And she would say yes, just to spite me. You ever do that, parents, to your kids? Come on. Anybody ever do that? Just to keep them on their toes? And when she would do that, she would remind me, and she would say, "You never know until you ask." It's burned into my conscience. You never know until you ask. What Jesus experiences here is that people have places to go, things to do, and people to see. Just like all the rest of us. Has anybody you ever tried to throw a party for people and gotten down to the day of and somebody said, "So how's it going? Are people going to come?" And you honestly have no idea? Because nobody has bothered to actually respond to your Facebook invite for your party. Nobody's actually told you whether they're going to show up. Happens to pastors all the time. All the time. We're going to throw an event. Who's coming? Have no idea. Did anybody register? Like 5 people. And then 50 show up. It is real that people wait until the very last second to make a commitment to anything. Don't worry, it happens to us, it happens to you. It's the same. People have places to go, things to do, and people to see. And what Jesus is saying here is that, a lot of the time we narrow our circle because we say no for people in advance. We anticipate them not being interested in what we're offering. Pastor Jordan said something last week that stuck with me, and I've heard it before, but I kind of forgot about it, that, statistically speaking, most people who are in relationship with somebody who goes to church would come to church with them at least one time if they were only asked. I experienced this in my own life when I was working at a music store just after university. And a music store is not the kind of place typically where conservative Christian types hang out. Just not the kind of thing that happens, okay? So our church was showing this dramatic production of an old book called Blue Like Jazz. If you've been around the church for a long time, you may have heard of this book before. Because in the mid-2000s, it was like a rallying cry for the church. Somebody actually articulating what it was like to be a person who was connected to the church but not sure if they wanted to be and had struggles and questions and doubts. And it was done in kind of this really hip way. Donald Miller is the author, if you want to look it up at some point. I still think it's a great book. And so we were putting on this dramatic production. And of course, we were all being encouraged by our church. Invite people out, because, they were spending a whole bunch of money on it, so they wanted people to show up. And so, can you help us? Can you invite people? Can you take the opportunity to invite one of your neighbors? And I was deeply afraid to say anything to the guys that I hung around with, because I was working full-time at the music store. All my friends were music store guys. And it took me weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to muster up enough courage to say to them, like, hey, I've been reading this book, and it's kind of about this. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? I was shocked when they actually engaged in the conversation and didn't do one of two things. Like, I think we assume that they're going to either just say, get it out of my face, or they're going to be polite Canadians and say, that's really nice for you. You ever have somebody respond to you like that? That's really nice for you. And it's a really polite Canadian way of saying, get out of here. That's what I thought was going to happen. Except it wasn't what happened. We had a really genuine conversation because I was genuinely interested in the book. And when I told them, hey, our church is putting on a production of this book, would you guys want to come and get like the snapshot? And much to my surprise, I think 3 guys were like, yeah, sure, I'll come. I'll come check it out. It was a huge change in the way that I perceive the way that people are going to respond to a simple sharing. Now, the problem is, I think a lot of the time we don't share out of our life. We don't share ourselves. We share a program, or we share a pamphlet, or we share a rhetoric that we learned. And I think that that's still really difficult. But I think that when you share yourself, when you are in relationship with someone, and you are genuinely passionate about what is going on in your life, and you have a genuine story to tell, people are interested in that. In this moment, Jesus is saying, I know that people have places to go, things to do, and people to see. I know that you assume the worst. But maybe you should exchange that for just keep going until they say no. Go until you get a no. Share your story, share your life, see what happens. To me, party theology is all about the gospel. This idea that we would open up our spaces, that we would go to serve, that we would stop saying no. Well, this is exactly what Jesus Christ did for us. See, Jesus continues to fascinate me because of all of the stories about a deity that the world has ever told. Jesus Christ, as far as I know, is unique in that he was sent to you and I. Not just as a prophet or a good teacher, but as God himself. Colossians chapter 2, verse 9 sets the table for us, reminding us that in Jesus Christ is all the fullness of God dwelling in one man's body. And that man, sent from God to us, went to a party and sat at a table all by himself and invited you and I to join the table. None of us would be here. None of us would have the sense of connection to God if Jesus himself had not decided to open up his circle, to come and, like a servant, lay his life down. None of us would be here if God took all the no's of humanity as the final word, but knew that there were some people who, if they heard the story, would come to Jesus and come to know him. Folks, I think as a church, I have seen and heard the stories long before I arrived about the passion of this church to open its circle, to serve the city, and to stop saying no for others, but to be available and open. And we're going to continue to do that It is a core value of ours. It's a way that we're going to lean. Because if we don't lean in this direction, unfortunately what can happen is we can just start looking inward, navel gazing. Please don't use that one on Instagram this week. Navel gazing. And you know what happens at that point? That's the moment at which the church starts to die. When we stop looking outside, because the gospel has a trajectory. The gospel only comes to you and I on its way to somebody else. The call to live a gospel life is just not salvation, but it's mission and it's calling. And it's important for us because it's so easy to let the negative responses fill our narrative. It's so easy to just not care. It's so easy to get lazy. What's the natural tendency of human beings? And so you have to lean hard against the forces that would pull you in the wrong direction. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. And we're going to sing that song, Make Room. And I hope that what you'll do is take a couple of minutes just now to think about the ways in which God might be asking you to make some more room for him and the people that he loves. Here's a couple of things you might take this time to do. Look, what you might do is find out for the first time that you're sitting at a table with Jesus. And it's time to acknowledge him. And it's time to say hello, and it's time to start a conversation. If you don't know how to do that, but you feel like it's time to do it, find somebody who looks like they know what they're doing. Myself, Melissa, Pastor Jordan, Quinn, or anybody else. There's a whole bunch of people here who would be honored to just help you start a conversation with Jesus. It's not difficult. It's not hard to do. There's no magic in it. It's always the call of Jesus to acknowledge his presence at your table. What it might be time for some of us to do is throw a party. What it might be time for some of us to do is open our circle in a really practical way. And just connect again with some people that maybe you haven't been connected to a lot. We're still fighting the effects of the pandemic. We're still fighting the effects of not being connected for so long. Next week, Pastor Melissa's preaching, by the way. You should come and hear her because she's really, really good at it. And I would think that if she wasn't my wife. But she's really, really good, and she's going to talk to us about the importance and value of community in the church. But for you, it might be time to create a circle. And it can be super simple. Throw a party, have an event, do something you like, invite some people that you know, some of them from church, some of them not from church, and see what happens. Doesn't have to be any more agenda than that. Maybe it's time to throw a party. And maybe it's time to join the church on mission for the first time or again, to really say, I'm going to get in and involved in the opportunities that my faith community creates for us to create spaces. Can I give you a tip? If we set up a table for something, we mean for you to bring somebody to it. It's that simple. If we're setting up tables, we mean for you to bring somebody. We mean for there to be empty chairs. We mean for us to have an opportunity to share what's really exciting here. I hear people say it all the time, that it feels like God is moving in our church, that there's something about this place, that there's something about these people. It's a beautiful thing. It's a rare thing. It's an exciting thing. Share it. It should be fairly easy to say, hey, we're going to throw a brisket party, dudes. Do you want to bring some of your friends? Hey, guys, we're going to do an event for your kids on Easter Sunday, or that weekend anyway. Invite somebody to come out and check it out. We promise we won't be weird. Or at least I promise I won't be too weird. And if somebody else is weird, I'll talk to them about it, okay? How about that? No, I think that we have something worth sharing. And we're going to continue. We're going to continue to lean outward, to invite people to open our spaces. And we hope that you'll join us in the opportunities that we create to do that. Guys, will you lead us in this song?
Well, church, that was an amazing service. I hope you were as blessed about it as we were. We love and miss you. If you need anything at all, send us an email. We'd love to connect with you any way that we can. All of our emails are just our first name at burnettchurch.com, or if you just want to send a general email, it's info@burnettchurch.com. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you very, very soon. Bye for now.